Right now, in December 2025, American military planners are staring at satellite imagery and intelligence reports that reveal something deeply alarming. China's military presence across the Pacific has expanded faster in 2025 than at any point in the past decade. Not just expanded, surged. And the speed, scale, and sophistication of this buildup has caught the Pentagon completely off guard, despite years of warnings that China was modernizing its military. Here's what actually happened in 2025 that Washington didn't expect. China launched its third aircraft carrier, the Fujian, for sea trials throughout this year, and it's expected to be fully operational by 2026. China now operates 3 carriers with a 4th under construction. The U.S. predicted China would struggle with carrier technology for decades. Instead, China went from 0 carriers in 2012 to 3 operational and 1 building by 2025, mastering in 13 years what took the U.S. nearly a century. But carriers are just the most visible component. Throughout 2025, China commissioned multiple Type 055 cruisers, the most advanced surface combatants in Asia. China launched additional Type 052D destroyers. China expanded submarine fleet with new Type 093B nuclear attack submarines and continued building Type 039C conventional submarines at rapid pace. By end of 2025, China operates the world's largest navy by hull count with approximately 370 ships and submarines compared to U.S. Navy's roughly 290. And it's not just numbers. Throughout 2025, Chinese naval vessels have been operating farther from Chinese shores than ever before. Chinese task forces conducted exercises in the Philippine Sea, the Western Pacific, even ventures into the Central Pacific approaching Hawaii. Chinese naval presence in the Indian Ocean throughout 2025 has been constant, with multiple vessels deployed continuously. Chinese ships have docked in Cambodia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and other ports throughout 2025, demonstrating global reach. This wasn't supposed to happen this fast. American naval dominance in the Pacific was supposed to be unchallengeable for decades. China was supposed to be a regional power constrained to waters near its coast. Instead, throughout 2025, China has demonstrated it's becoming a true blue water navy capable of operating globally. And the Pentagon, despite spending over $800 billion annually on defense, is scrambling to figure out how to respond to a peer competitor that emerged faster than anyone predicted. Let me show you what China actually built in 2025, because the specific capabilities reveal the scale of the buildup. The Fujian, China's third carrier and first with electromagnetic catapults comparable to U.S. technology, conducted multiple sea trials throughout 2025. This carrier represents a technological leap. China's first 2 carriers, Liaoning and Shandong, use ski jump launches limiting aircraft payload. Fujian uses catapults allowing fully loaded aircraft launches, same capability as latest U.S. carriers. Throughout 2025, Chinese state media released footage of Fujian trials showing successful catapult launches and recoveries. By most estimates, Fujian will be fully operational by 2026, giving China 3 carriers and demonstrating mastery of complex carrier technology that only the U.S. and France previously possessed. And China isn't stopping at 3. Throughout 2025, satellite imagery confirmed construction continues on a 4th carrier, possibly nuclear-powered, at Jiangnan Shipyard. If nuclear-powered, this would represent another technological leap, giving China carriers with unlimited range like U.S. Navy's Nimitz and Ford classes. By 2030, China could operate 5 or 6 carriers, approaching parity with U.S. in numbers, while operating in home waters where they have geographic advantage. Now look at surface combatants, because this is where Chinese naval modernization is most impressive. The Type 055 cruiser is arguably the most capable surface combatant in the world. At roughly 12,000, 13,000 tons, it's larger than U.S. Arleigh Burke destroyers. It carries 112 vertical launch cells compared to 96 on U.S. destroyers. It has advanced radar and weapon systems comparable or superior to Western equivalents. China has commissioned 8 Type 055 cruisers as of 2025, with all 8 in active service by end of year. This is an entire class of the most advanced surface combatants built and deployed in less than a decade. The U.S. struggles to build 3 destroyers per year. China built and commissioned 8 of its most advanced warships in roughly 5 years. Type 052D destroyers, China's workhorse modern destroyer at roughly 7,500 tons, continue being built rapidly. China has commissioned over 25 Type 052D destroyers, with more under construction in 2025. These are highly capable ships with advanced air defense and anti-ship capabilities. By end of 2025, China operates roughly 50-plus modern destroyers and cruisers commissioned in the past 15 years. The U.S. operates roughly 70 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and a handful of Ticonderoga cruisers, but many are older and approaching retirement. In terms of modern, capable surface combatants, China is approaching numerical parity with the U.S. Navy, and in the Western Pacific, where conflict would most likely occur, China operates from home ports with short logistics chains, while U.S. ships deploy from distant bases with extended supply lines. Let me tell you what happened with Chinese submarine fleet in 2025, because underwater capabilities are where China has made dramatic progress. China operates approximately 60-plus submarines as of 2025, including roughly 10-12 nuclear attack submarines and 6 ballistic missile submarines, with the remainder being advanced conventional diesel-electric submarines. The Type 093B nuclear attack submarine, China's latest SSN, entered service with multiple units operational by 2025. While not as quiet as U.S. Virginia-class submarines, the Type 093B represents substantial improvement over earlier Chinese nuclear submarines, and China is continuing development with Type 095, expected to be even more capable, potentially entering service by 2026-2027. Chinese conventional submarines, particularly the Type 039C Yuan class with air-independent propulsion, are extremely quiet and effective in littoral waters near Chinese coast. Throughout 2025, Chinese submarines conducted exercises throughout the South China Sea, East China Sea, and increasingly into the Philippine Sea and Western Pacific. U.S. anti-submarine warfare capabilities, once dominant, face increasing challenges tracking and monitoring Chinese submarine activity. Throughout 2025, there have been multiple reports of Chinese submarines operating undetected for extended periods, suggesting improved Chinese submarine technology and training. Now look at what China built on land throughout 2025, because the naval buildup is supported by massive shore-based infrastructure. Chinese military bases in the South China Sea on artificial islands at Subi Reef, Mischief Reef, and Fiery Cross Reef have been operational for years, but throughout 2025, these facilities expanded capabilities. Throughout 2025, satellite imagery showed continued construction on these islands. Hangars, storage facilities, port improvements, all suggesting China is treating these artificial islands as permanent military bases, despite international legal challenges. Chinese military aircraft, including fighters, bombers, and maritime patrol aircraft, regularly operate from these bases in 2025. Hainan Island hosts major Chinese naval base at Yulin, with underground submarine pens that allow submarines to enter and exit undetected. Throughout 2025, this facility continued expanding. Satellite imagery shows continuous construction and improvement of submarine facilities. Chinese air bases across the southern coast and inland have seen major expansion throughout 2025. New hangars, extended runways, increased hardened shelters for aircraft protection, all indicating preparation for sustained operations. Chinese missile forces expanded throughout 2025. DF-21D and DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missiles, designed to target aircraft carriers, continue being deployed in larger numbers. These missiles represent serious threat to U.S. carriers operating near Chinese coast. Throughout 2025, Chinese military conducted multiple missile tests, including hypersonic weapons tests, demonstrating advancing capabilities. let me show you what Chinese military operations looked like throughout 2025, because activity levels reveal growing confidence and capability. Throughout 2025, Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy Plan conducted multiple large-scale exercises, some near Taiwan, some in the Philippine Sea, some farther into the Western Pacific. In April 2025, China conducted major naval exercises involving carrier strike groups, dozens of surface combatants, submarines, and aircraft simulating complex operations. Western observers noted the sophistication and coordination exceeded previous Chinese exercises. In August 2025, Chinese carrier Shandong sailed through the Philippine Sea conducting flight operations, demonstrating ability to operate beyond First Island chain that runs from Japan through Taiwan to Philippines. Throughout 2025, Chinese carriers increasingly operated in the Philippine Sea rather than staying close to Chinese coast. In October 2025, Chinese task force, including Type 055 cruiser, sailed near Hawaii, closer to U.S. territory than Chinese naval vessels had operated in years. This wasn't threatening approach, but clearly demonstrated growing Chinese confidence and capability to operate at strategic distances. Throughout 2025, Chinese aircraft, including H-6 bombers, regularly flew through international airspace near Japan, Taiwan, and Philippines. Chinese air patrols became routine throughout the year, demonstrating sustained operational tempo. Chinese Coast Guard vessels, operating as paramilitary force, maintained constant presence throughout 2025 in disputed waters around Scarborough Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, and other contested features. These operations continued year-round, demonstrating Chinese determination to control waters, it claims. Now look at what this means for U.S. military position in Pacific, because the implications are strategic. For decades, U.S. Navy dominated the Western Pacific with essentially no peer competition. Throughout 2025, that era definitively ended. China now fields naval force that in its home waters potentially matches or exceeds U.S. capabilities. U.S. military strategy relies on forward deployment, ships based in Japan, carriers operating from Guam, aircraft on bases across Pacific. But these forward positions are increasingly vulnerable. Chinese missiles can target every U.S. base within roughly 2,000 kilometers of Chinese coast. U.S. carriers entering this zone face serious risk from Chinese anti-ship ballistic missiles, submarines, and aircraft. Throughout 2025, U.S. military conducted multiple exercises and deployed additional forces to Pacific, attempting to demonstrate resolve. But the fundamental reality is changing. U.S. can no longer operate in Western Pacific with assumption of dominance. Chinese military throughout 2025 demonstrated it can contest U.S. presence in waters China considers critical. This doesn't mean U.S. would lose conflict, but it means conflict would be extremely costly, outcome uncertain, and risk would be high enough that U.S. might not be willing to fight over issues that previously seemed within U.S. sphere to control. Taiwan is the obvious flashpoint. Throughout 2025, Chinese military buildup has been explicitly designed to give China capability to invade Taiwan if leadership decides that's necessary. And throughout 2025, that capability has grown substantially. Let me tell you what specific capabilities China developed in 2025 that threatened Taiwan. Chinese amphibious fleet expanded throughout 2025. Type 075 landing helicopter docks, comparable to U.S. America-class ships, continue being commissioned. China now operates 3 Type 075 LHDs with more building. Type 071 landing platform docks, smaller but still capable, number 8 ships in service by 2025. These ships can transport thousands of troops, dozens of vehicles, helicopters, and landing craft. Chinese amphibious capacity by end of 2025 is sufficient for initial invasion wave, though sustaining invasion over time would be enormously challenging. Chinese Air Force throughout 2025 continued receiving J-20 stealth fighters, China's most advanced aircraft. Estimates suggest China operates 200 plus J-20s by 2025, one of the world's largest stealth fighter fleets. These aircraft give China capability to contest air superiority over Taiwan Strait that U.S. previously held unchallenged. Chinese missile arsenal targeting Taiwan is enormous. Estimates suggest China has over 2,000 ballistic and cruise missiles positioned to strike Taiwan. Throughout 2025, this arsenal continued growing. In conflict, China could launch devastating missile barrage against Taiwan military, government, and infrastructure before invasion even begins. Chinese cyber capabilities, while difficult to assess precisely, are believed to be extensive. Throughout 2025, there were multiple reports of Chinese cyber reconnaissance targeting Taiwan and U.S. military networks. In conflict, cyber attacks could disable communications, power, and command systems. The combined capability China has built by end of 2025 means invasion of Taiwan, while still enormously risky and difficult, is within China's potential military capability. Whether China would attempt invasion is political decision, but throughout 2025, the military capability to do so has clearly grown. Now look at what U.S. response has been throughout 2025, because this reveals the challenge facing Pentagon. U.S. military throughout 2025 announced multiple initiatives to address Chinese buildup, more ships to be based in Pacific, additional aircraft deployed to regional bases, closer cooperation with allies, including Japan, Australia, Philippines. But the fundamental problem is that U.S. military is stretched globally. Commitments in Europe due to Russia-Ukraine situation, commitments in Middle East. U.S. Navy of roughly 290 ships must cover Pacific, Atlantic, Mediterranean, Persian Gulf globally. China's 370-ship Navy focuses primarily on Western Pacific. In Western Pacific specifically, China can concentrate more forces than U.S. can deploy to the region. And Chinese forces operate from home bases with short logistics, while U.S. forces deploy from distant bases requiring complex logistics chains. Throughout 2025, this geographic and numerical disadvantage for U.S. in Western Pacific has become increasingly apparent. War games conducted by Pentagon and think tanks throughout 2025 reportedly showed difficult outcomes for U.S. in Taiwan conflict scenarios, with high casualties and uncertain results. Let me show you what allies are doing throughout 2025, because alliance dynamics matter. Japan throughout 2025 has been strengthening military, increasing defense spending, improving capabilities. But Japan faces legal and political constraints on what military can do offensively. Australia throughout 2025 announced plans for nuclear submarine acquisition through AUKUS partnership, but these submarines won't be operational until 2030s at earliest. Philippines throughout 2025 allowed expanded U.S. military access to bases, but Philippines military is weak and couldn't meaningfully resist Chinese pressure. South Korea throughout 2025 has been focused more on North Korea than China, and economic ties with China constrain how far South Korea will go in supporting U.S. against China. The alliance network U.S. relies on in Pacific is real but has limits. Throughout 2025, it became clear that in serious conflict with China, U.S. would bear primary burden, with allied support being helpful but not decisive. Now let me tell you what I personally think is happening beneath official statements. I believe Chinese leadership decided roughly 5-10 years ago that they needed military capability to resolve Taiwan issue by force if necessary. And throughout past decade, but especially accelerating in past 5 years, including 2025, they've been systematically building that capability. I believe Chinese leadership knows that attempting Taiwan invasion would be enormously costly and risky, but I think they've concluded they need the capability so that Taiwan can't move toward independence with assumption China couldn't respond militarily. Throughout 2025, Chinese military buildup has been creating facts that change strategic calculations. Each new carrier, each dozen destroyers, each 100 fighters increases Chinese confidence, and reduces U.S. willingness to fight. I believe we're watching the most significant shift in Pacific military balance since World War II. Throughout 2025, China has been rising to parity or potentially superiority in Western Pacific, ending 80 years of undisputed U.S. naval dominance. Subscribe to this channel if you want continued honest analysis of this military shift, because mainstream coverage throughout 2025 has downplayed severity of Chinese buildup to avoid alarming audiences or undermining confidence in U.S. military. Let me show you what 2026 could look like based on how 2025 ended. Fujian carrier will likely achieve full operational capability in 2026, giving China 3 fully operational carriers. 4th carrier will continue construction with possible launch in 2026 or 2027. Chinese surface fleet will continue growing in 2026 with additional Type 055 cruisers and Type 052D destroyers commissioned. By end of 2026, China could operate 400-plus naval vessels. Chinese submarine fleet will continue expanding in 2026 with more Type 093B and first Type 095 potentially entering service. Chinese submarine activity in Western Pacific will likely increase further. Chinese military operations in 2026 will likely become even more assertive. More exercises near Taiwan, more flights through sensitive airspace, more naval deployments farther from Chinese coast, each operation normalizing Chinese military presence and testing U.S. responses. Based on 2025 trajectory, 2026 could be a year when Chinese military superiority in Western Pacific becomes undeniable to all observers, forcing U.S. to fundamentally reassess strategy and region. Now look at what troubles me most about late 2025 situation. U.S. military spending throughout 2025 exceeded $800 billion, more than the next 10 countries combined. Yet despite this enormous spending, Chinese military throughout 2025 has been rising to effective parity in Western Pacific. This reveals that money isn't everything. Geography matters. China is fighting in home waters. Focus matters. China concentrates on Pacific while U.S. spreads globally. Shipbuilding capacity matters. China builds ships faster and cheaper than U.S. Throughout 2025, U.S. struggled to build 2 and 3 destroyers while China built 6 to 8. U.S. has better technology in many areas, but China is closing gaps while producing greater quantities. And most concerning, throughout 2025, there's been no evidence that U.S. has strategy to reverse this shift. More spending won't help if shipyards can't build faster. Better technology won't help if it's deployed in insufficient numbers. Alliances won't help if geography and numbers favor China. China's military buildup in Pacific grew fast throughout 2025. The U.S. didn't expect this rise in power to happen this quickly or comprehensively. And as we enter 2026, the reality is that Western Pacific military balance has shifted fundamentally. Not that China would certainly win conflict, but that conflict outcome is uncertain enough that U.S. might not be willing to risk war over issues that previously seemed clearly within U.S. capability to control militarily. That's 2025, the year Chinese military buildup accelerated beyond American expectations. The year Chinese Navy approached 400 ships while U.S. Navy struggled at under 300. The year Chinese carriers operated globally. The year Western Pacific military balance shifted decisively. Washington didn't expect this rise in power to happen so fast, didn't prepare adequate response, and as 2025 ends, still doesn't have strategy to reverse Chinese military advantages in region that matters most to Chinese interests and increasingly shapes whether U.S. can maintain dominance in Pacific. Subscribe if you want continued coverage in 2026 as this military balance continues shifting. Because based on how 2025 ended, 2026 will likely be a year when Chinese military superiority in Western Pacific becomes so clear that even skeptics can't deny the shift has occurred. The buildup is fast, the rise is real, and U.S. didn't expect this power shift until it was already underway and potentially irreversible without conflict nobody wants.